Any idea how many cases of spirits your brands have sold if you put them all together?
Altogether, not the slightest, no.
Yeah. Because Bailey's is the biggest, I assume.
Oh, yes, Bailey's, by far.
And then what?
After that,
Ciroc, I suppose. That'd be pretty well up there, wouldn't it?
over 2 million in its heyday. Tanqueray Ten. Singleton, of course, is the fourth biggest selling single malt in the world now. And that's had a 40-year run, the Singleton, which is pretty fantastic.
It sort of seemed to have a bit of a relaunch about 15, 20 years ago, right?
It did.
Yeah.
What happened was I was invited to go to Taiwan. I'd left the idea at the time, permanently. And a woman called Anne Ho, who was marketing director in Taiwan, invited me over and said, malt is beginning to happen in the Far East and we wanted to do a malt brand. And I said, why did you do the Singleton? Oh, it's great. Singleton, great name, single malt, Singleton. And we did. We played around with a number of the Bells were going to do a single malt, but didn't. Or maybe they did, I don't know. But I had this idea of putting a bell on every table, and every time anybody wanted a bell, they'd tinkle.
Interactive, theatrical drinking.
Well, it would have been a nice way of doing it.
Yeah,
And,
quite anachronistic as well, sort of servant bell. Sort of.
Yeah, that came from my background in South Africa, where you would
actually
tinkle a bell and food would appear. But it seemed to. I think I can't stop having ideas for brands. Every time I meet somebody who has a brand, I have an idea. And nowadays, I'm very happy to give them away for nothing. Because
so on the Singleton, was the idea, because it's 3 distilleries, isn't it? Glenore, Glendullan, and Duffton now, the other 3. Was it always the plan to have a kind of single malt brand with multiple distilleries underneath it?
There was an underlying thought that by having a brand name, Singleton was developed around about the time that there were huge stock shortages at Cardu in Spain. It took off and they couldn't supply. And there were all kinds of debates about what to do and should they reduce the age, etc.
Key component in Johnnie Walker traditionally as well, isn't it, Cardu?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, the Singleton was a generic name. It wasn't distillery specific. And I had that in mind at the beginning. But having something in mind at the beginning, the brand, but once you develop the brand, you have no involvement in it any longer, which is a pity. But it brings lots of tears when you see how things can be made to look.
It must be a bit like being a surrogate parent, and you kind of
it is.
There's this gestation period, and then you have to give
a real parent. You create the brand, and then it disappears off, and people. I've seen. The Singleton new pack, I was really pleased with that. I thought it was better than the old one. But the origins of the idea were interesting because with the Singleton, I remember the morning, a February morning in London, just off Regent's Park, and we were tasting Glen Grant because Glen Grant was making huge inroads into the Italian market using a line Pura Molto. And I remember saying to somebody, if you got a bottle of Glen Grant, they said, yeah, can we taste it? And I tasted it, and it was like brown Smirnoff. It was just a very easy, almost flavorless.
There's another brand idea, Smirnoff Brown.
No, it wasn't. No,
that shit really will never sell.
So I said, look, what we need is why don't we develop a malt for blend drinkers? I mean, I think there's a lot of bullshit in my field. People talk about thinking outside the box. And I found most of the best ideas in the world are inside the box. If you think about it, there were 96% blend drinkers and 4% malt drinkers. Malts were very unapproachable in those days because the packaging was simple, almost like chateau wines. And it was difficult to go from, say, Grouse or Johnnie Black to something like
Glenfiddich or Macallan.
no, Lafroig or Lagavulin.
Oh, something smoky, yeah.
I love those, but I mean, it was difficult to make that transition, particularly for Americans, one taste and you're dead. So I said, why don't we do a malt for blend drinkers? And the other guy said, hey, that's a great idea. And then we had Lafroig, no, not Lafroig, Orthrusk. And Orthrusk was a very easy malt. I mean, estery, flowery, sweet.
Yeah.
So it became the perfect base for the Singleton. And that's outlined. I remember Mac came up with the company name, which was Rookill and Ross. And those were to do with his Scottish father.
And Mac is who?
Mac Macpherson. He's the Cornish guy, the guy who died
just for the benefit of people listening and watching. So, because we were talking about him before we started, weren't we?
Right, yeah.
So he was the technical guy who basically brought to life a lot of your ideas in liquid form, correct?
Yeah, and he could do stuff I couldn't dream of. I just tell him what the end result was. With Smirnoff Black, for example, I said to him, we're going to do 4 focus groups, I think. And at the beginning of the end of each one, we're going to do a blind tasting between your product and Absolute. And the word that I'd given him was smooth. I said, I want people to take the word smooth out of it. And he did it. I can't tell you how, because somebody would kill me, but it was very clever. And he took it right to the edge of vodka legality.
Yeah. I think I have some idea about how he did it, actually. Back from my days in Diageo, I heard rumours about
Tell me.
the Smirnoff. I heard that it has a small amount of new make whiskey in it. There you go. It's confirmed.
Malt whiskey distillate, that's it.
Yeah. Which, so I used to, as I mentioned before we started talking, I used to work for Diageo many years ago, and part of my job was to go around and do comparative tastings with Smirnoff Black alongside, well, we used to tend to do Smirnoff Black alongside Absolute, Stolichnaya, Finlandia, what else? 42 Below. Occasionally Grey Goose, but Grey Goose was sort of that little bit more expensive than Smirnoff Black, as was Belvedere. So it didn't it wasn't a pouring like speed rail product, or they weren't pouring speed rail products. They were more like martini vodkas, whereas Smirnoff Black was sitting in the wells of a lot of bars and being put into long mixing drinks. But it was remarkable. You would do these tastings and people would be like, wow, this vodka actually kind of tastes of something. And because it has some flavour, it smooths out some of, there you go, that's that magic word, smooths out some of the sort of raw ethanol characteristic which you find in very neutral vodkas like Stolichnaya and even Absolute and Finlandia. So it was very, very clever. The legality side of it is interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, you can flavour vodkas. Like, you're totally within your rights to do that.
But you call it flavoured vodka.
But you call it flavoured vodka. So... I mean, do you remember much about that legal process of getting it pushed through as a vodka, despite the fact it contained something that wasn't vodka as well?
What?
The new make whiskey.
With Smirnoff, you mean?
Yeah.
No, I've never had anything to do. I mean, all I did was I said,
make a smooth
produce. In fact, what was interesting about this was Smirnoff in 1990 was to produce a premium version was a bit like trying to get a Michelin star for a Kentucky Fried Chicken place because it was cheap supermarket, cut case vodka, and it had no reputation, so I'm afraid. So producing a premium on that to compete with Absolute.
Yes.
I said the only way we could do it is by having a better product. I mean, not some bullshit story about being distilled 25 times or, filtered through nuns' knickers or anything. It had to be a product story, something perceptible that you could taste. And that was, Mac had retired. He came back out of retirement because we liked working together. And but Smirnoff Black should have been a real player, but it suffered from politics because Smirnoff, the brand, was built by Hubline in America. And through management changes, they decided to take the management of Smirnoff away from Hartford, Connecticut, and put it into the UK. And from that moment on, we were buggered because they were never going to put American might behind Smirnoff Black.
Yeah, especially after they'd kind of single-handedly created the vodka market over there in the US as well.
That was hugely emotional for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So it didn't work well in the US because the US team didn't have the motivation to promote it because they'd had it such.
They had the motivation not to promote it.
The motivation not to promote it.
Exactly.
But I do remember it doing pretty well in the UK, and obviously the UK is nowhere near the size of the US as a vodka market. But certainly my time spent with that brand, it was in a lot of bars and it was being used in cocktail competitions and all that kind of stuff. And then it did just seem to sort of fade away, you know?
Well, what they also didn't do, which was, I think there's a kind of, they had a TV commercial. Do you remember that? About the Russian Revolution.
Vaguely. They did play off the historical side of it a little bit, didn't they?
I think they fell in love with the theatre of, the steps and Eisenstein and stuff. And they lost the fact that it was the world's smoothest vodka. And I think, to me, I've been having a go at the wine people because they think wine is a religion, and I think wine's a product that sells in supermarkets. And the sooner they get their heads around that, the sooner they can, make changes. But it doesn't work like that. There's a whole ethos of being up itself about the wine business.
I suppose the other problem Smirnoff Black faced was that it had Ciroc come along. This is all obviously in the Diageo stable, and then Kettle won the purchase of that. And not to mention that you've obviously got Smirnoff Red there as well. So you've then got quite a lot of competing products in a portfolio that's getting a bit bloated with premium vodkas.
Well, I mean, Smirnoff Black, I think, should have focused on smoothness. I mean, everything about it should have been smooth. And I mean, I had to write an ad because sometimes you do that. And I just had a cat looking at a martini and saying it purrs. So smooth it purrs. And but then I was just the guy who developed the brand. You develop the brand, you hand it over, and then it's bye-bye, thank you very much.
In your book, which we have a copy of here, I think, and I already have a copy of the second edition. Let's get that on the camera there. Which I've read, and you kindly brought me the first edition copy of That Shit Will Never Sell. It's a fantastic read, and it's just remarkable the number of brands that you have. We'll leave it in the middle. That's the number of brands that you've got your fingerprints on them. What's really enlightening about it is you tell the sort of success stories, of which there are many. Bailey's and Ciroc. I know you don't feel that that's as successful as it could have been, or at least it didn't manifest itself as the way it could have done. Remind me, what else have we got in there?
There's pictures.
J&B. Oh, okay, we got pictures of all of them. So there we go. Oh wow, look at that. I'll tell you what I'll do actually is I'll put up on the screen, on the video version, all of the different brands, and so people can see. But we've got just tons of stuff here. Purdey's, I was really surprised, but I didn't know you'd been involved in that one. Tanqueray 10, of course, which is much beloved by many a bartender. I mean, I still think Tanqueray Ten is probably the best gin in the world.
Tanqueray Ten was I mean, what happened was Bombay Sapphire left the building, and they loved the brand. I mean, it's a sexy brand. It's got a nice pack, a good name. The blue bottle was incredibly courageous.
The botanicals on the side of the bottle as well was very novel for the time as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I think everything about it looked good, and all the signs were that it was heading upward, and it had to go because of the mergers and acquisitions thing, and because they had Gordon's and Kilby's and Tanqueray and other stuff. So there are too many gins. And John McGraw, the CEO at the time, I think this was Guinness UD time, said to us, we want a gin to occupy that space, and we want it really quickly. And I think one of the things that was why I talk about this inside the box ideas is that so many ideas are there waiting for you to take them up. And the first one that came up was that vodka is about 10 times or 20 times the size of gin. And you think to yourself, vodka is a dull category. It's smooth, it's tasteless, it's colorless. It's overfished with a whole host of brands. Why don't we do a gin for vodka drinkers? And there's a lot more of them. And then I've got a very good memory. I remember everything anybody ever said to me about, and I remember consumers saying in a focus group years ago, I hate gin. I hate that sort of harsh, bitter, dirty taste that gin gives me. So I thought, well, what a great idea. Why can't we produce a gin that dials down on the juniper and coriander and stuff like that and ups the fruitiness? And the idea came walking around distillery. We were sitting on bags of botanicals in Leindon in Essex, which was the Tanqueray distillery. Mm. And you know the way you play around with botanicals, you rub them and you smell them. And I said to the guy who ran the distillery, can you make a gin out of fresh botanicals? And he said, yeah, might cost a bit more, but eminently possible. And that's how the idea was born. It was Adrian Walker, the guy who was running it in the US, also a highly skilled technical guy, said he produced the gin, and it was absolutely fantastic, and it's won so many awards as the best gin in the world. But nobody ever uses this strategy for vodka drinkers. Yeah. Why not? I mean, it's such a huge opportunity. Mm. But what do? I mean, you knock yourself out coming up with something as distinctive and different as that. And then the ads say Stanley Tucci drinks it. Mm. And what a total cop-out, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Tanqueray Ten's gone through, what is it now, 25 years old, something like that? I feel like it's gone...
just about.
Yeah. It's gone through a sort of evolutionary process during that time. And I do feel like when it was first launched, there was a fair amount of emphasis, at least from my perspective from being a bartender, mm-hmm. and then eventually working with the brand, on the fact that it used fresh botanicals. When I used to do training sessions with it, we would emphasize the use of fresh fruit. And I remember visiting the distillery once they'd moved it to Cameron Bridge, and Tom Nicol was there as the master distiller, and he would always talk about cutting the fruit and putting it in the tiny 10 pot still and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think a single pink grapefruit cut in half would go in there, and I can't remember what else. Was it limes and lemons, or maybe just limes?
No, it was grapefruit and lime.
Grapefruit and lime.
With
and
the
then
two fruits.
Chamomile as well, I think, went in there.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think it was chamomile. But, and it's a great story. And I think when it first launched, it was, I would imagine, the most expensive gin on the market, mm-hmm. somewhere around 30 quid a bottle. I remember going to visit bars with it when I was working for Diageo in like 2006, 2007, and people just going, 30 quid for a bottle of gin? Are you crazy? Like super premium, ultra premium gin? What are you talking about? And of course, no one, I don't think fully expected what was around the corner, and all the gins that are now on the market, and many of them charging way more than £50 a bottle for something that I would argue is not as good as Tanqueray 10. But I think, yeah, during that evolution that it's gone through and the gin market becoming more crowded, I think they've probably lost some of that narrative around fresh fruit. They've lost the fact that it was initially designed to sort of compete with vodka. And now they're kind of falling into that same trap, which a lot of brands do, is, well, let's get a celebrity brand ambassador behind it and see if we can generate some traction that way.
The trouble with Stanley Tucci, I mean, I'm sure he's a lovely guy and he's a very good actor. But you could put him with almost any product, from wristwatches to motor cars, etc. I was disappointed they didn't go really after that strategy, because these are products, and if you can give people a reason why they should buy it rather than something else. Because I mean, I wanted a gin that was better than Bombay, and Bombay was talk. Our talk was literally about the product, and you could see the difference in the mouth, which you were reading a lot of difference in Bombay into the Botanicals and stuff like that, and the ads, and they didn't do that. But the same thing happened with Ciroc again, which was. But back to Tanqueray, one of the things I hated was that they had a thing. We'd given them this great line, and they put on the front of the pack, "batch distilled." And I hate that, because, I mean, how big is Diageo's batch?
Well, all gins are batch distilled, really.
It doesn't mean anything, or handcrafted. I mean,
yeah, again, it's just nonsensical. It seems to add value, but really it just is.
It does in focus groups, and you say this one isn't batch distilled, and that one is, and they buy that.
Well, that may be true, but then could you use better text than batch distilled to evoke an even more positive response? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
I think, just going back to the Bombay thing, I always thought that was the sort of ultimate crossover vodka to gin beverage, because Bombay Sapphire, when you taste it, and because of the vapor infusion process, they don't boil the botanicals, it's a very light style of gin. It's almost like someone's taken a bottle of gin and then cut it 50-50 with vodka. It's like a halfway house. Tanqueray 10, on the other hand, was an intense flavour. It's just that the intensity was more in the citrus direction than would be normal for a gin. So I guess it would appeal to people who liked sort of bright citric vodka cocktails, but not people who want a very light tasting vodka style drink, because it had such an intense flavour when it came through. I mean, with tonic water, it was fantastic. Like that, I think it was the grapefruit more than anything for me, with the chamomile, and then there's still some juniper there too as well. It's not like it's. I mean, some citrus forward gins today, you're struggling to find the juniper in there at all. Whereas Tanqueray 10, I think the balance was great.
I think the great thing about these brands was that we knew exactly what we wanted to do. And one of the things I loved, going back to Smirnoff Black, we never gave it a name. We never called it Smirnoff 21 or Smirnoff Imperial or whatever. We just said, let them find out, make up the name for themselves. And that was Smirnoff Black.
So it had black on the label, and then they kind of came with the name of themselves. Is that how it works?
It's got the name Black on the label now.
Right.
Which I think is just dumbing it down.
It's like Johnnie Walker was the same, wasn't it? Johnnie Walker Black Label was originally just called Johnnie Walker's Old Highland Blend.
Yeah.
But it had a black label, and then that became the de facto name, and so the name followed.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting. And there's something powerful about letting consumers choose the name, right? It becomes a sort of cultural trope and then instantiated by the brand afterwards.
I do. I think if you can get consumers engaging with the brand and giving it something of themselves, that helps a huge amount. And I love to work in those categories. It's much more challenging to come up with a new vodka or a new gin or a new whiskey, for that matter. And I've got loads of whiskies.
So have I.
You've got more than
I didn't come up with the brands though.
no, I've created a few of them.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few of your creations around here.
Have you got Jet?
Haven't got Jet. That's the J&B variant for. Was it for Taiwan? Korea. Korea. Yeah. Let's come back to that later. I'll tell you what. We've touched a bit on white spirits, and it's a great start. I want to get into whiskey, and I think we should talk about Baileys maybe towards the end as well. But let's rewind back to your life and your sort of personal career. Mm-hmm. Take us back to the start. So how did you land yourself in a position where you were designing spirit products? We'll get back to the show shortly, but first I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, Fever-Tree. Fever-Tree have been my mixer of choice for more than a decade now, going right back to when I used them as our mixer at 15 in Cornwall in 2005. It's a very long time ago. This is a brand, of course, that made its name with tonic water, but to be honest with you, the thing that's going to be most excited at the moment is their range of ginger mixers. They have ginger beer, ginger ale, and then this product here, which is possibly my favorite in the entire range, Fever-Tree Spiced Orange Ginger Ale. The product starts out just like their normal ginger ale, flavored with 3 unique gingers that harmoniously come together for a nice citric, zesty, but also subtly spicy ginger effect. Then 2 more ingredients are added: cinnamon for a nice baking spice hum, and then fresh clementine, which really extends that citric flavor and adds weight and body to this ginger ale. I would happily drink this stuff on its own, but of course it's a mixer, and it's best served with a nice whiskey, extending out into a highball and adding some real length and depth to it. Don't be fooled by the name. It's spiced orange. It might sound like it's a wintry ingredient, but actually it works brilliantly in summer highballs. And since we're approaching that period now's the time to crack it out.
Well, I started out in advertising in the 50s in South Africa. Made a terrible mistake. I bought a suit for the interview, and so they made me into an account executive, which was a kind of as a go-between between the creatives and the client. Came to England in 61, and because that's what I did, an account man, I did that for another 8 years. And then at the age of 30, I thought, well, I was never going to make it as the CEO of the company. I wanted to do something creative. I always wanted to. I thought advertising was about being creative. So I persuaded my boss to set up a department to help companies develop new products. I didn't know anything about it, but I had experience on the creation of Kerrygold butter for the Irish about 8 years behind. And that really excited me to create something new, especially for a national cause. And he agreed, much to my surprise, put me with Hugh Seymour Davis, the copywriter. And about a month into setting up this department, I was sent on a seminar to Stresa on Lake Maggiore, with a whole lot of Unilever guys. It was on market research. And one of the speakers was a guy called Tom Jago, who worked for a company. He's an ex-ad man also, and he worked for a company called IDV. And he did a talk, and the guy said, "You're the only English-speaking guy on this course. Could you take him out to dinner?"
So just to pause there, IDV is International Distillers and Vintners, is that correct?
It is, and it became part of the merger that created it was bought by Watney's. It was then bought by Grand Metropolitan Hotels. It was then became Guinness UD and then Diageo.
Yeah, so precursor to Diageo.
Yeah. And Tom and I really hit it off. I remember sitting up at a bar in Stresa looking at all these bottles and why is the bat on the Bacardi bottle? What's the significance of the black and white dogs on black and white whiskey? I remember he gave me 2 drinks to try, Himbergeist and Poir Williams.
You're going to have to help me with the first one. Himbergeist. What's that?
I think it's a kind of raspberry liqueur.
It does ring a bell, but I can't picture it.
It's from somewhere in Germany.
Okay.
And I remember rubbing it on my hand to get the aroma. And we became firm friends. And I said to him at the end of the evening, we're setting up this new product thing. Any chance of getting some work from you? Absolutely, he said. And so we had a client.
And Tom Jago, you worked with quite a lot over the years, and he ended up. He was involved in Johnnie Walker Blue Label, was he not? The creation of that.
I don't know. He moved over. He left. He and I worked together from 1969 to 1984. When he left IDV to join, I think he worked for Seagram's. He worked for Guinness UD as well.
Which, of course, Seagram's, when that broke up, and then Guinness all sort of folded into Diageo amongst others as well, didn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It said he was involved with Johnnie Walker Blue Label, but I don't know.
Yeah. It's on his Wikipedia page, I think, but not that that's anything necessarily to go by. Sometimes it's factually correct, but then a stopped clock is correct twice a day as well, isn't it?
Well, as the old saying goes, success has many fathers.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's true, and that's why the subtitle of your book is a book about ideas. No, see, you've changed the subtitle for the second edition, haven't you?
Well, what I've tried to do with the second edition is make it more. I got a lot of feedback from people who've read the book, a lot of them not in the business, who said it's just a very entertaining autobiography. And I thought, well, maybe I've sold as many copies as I can to people in the business, so I'll try and sell it to normal human beings.
Normal humans.
Exactly.
But yeah, the subtitle on the other one is The Men Who Created the Drinks Brands Again and Again and Again. I've
It's from the men who brought you, who sold you.
That's it.
What you didn't know you wanted. Again, in fact, I was listening to your podcast last night with the bartender who did that Duke's Martini.
Yes, Salvatore Calabrese. Yeah.
That's right. And he said, you'd like to give the consumer what they want. I think my definition of innovation is you'd like to give the consumer what they don't know what they want, which I think is a whole different approach, which sadly I think a company like Diageo has gone away from. So it's all, I don't think what the consumer says really counts for very much on something innovative. Consumer picks stuff that they like what they know, and they don't know. If you sit in a focus group and two guys say, wow, best idea ever, and 8 people say, I think it's garbage, sometimes you go with the 2 people.
Yeah. So let's break down your sort of ideation process, coming up with these ideas. How do you're talking about thinking inside the box, but you're also talking about identifying the things that people don't even know they want yet. Mm-hmm. So how do you sort of break all of that apart so that you're not creating something that's just riding along with a current trend, you're almost creating a new trend?
Trying to. Yeah, I mean, I could give you a good example. Well, Ciroc, we can take Ciroc. I mean, Grey Goose had a 10-year start on Diageo, I think, and it built this very top tier. And somebody said, well, how do we compete with Grey Goose? And I said, well, we have to be better in some ways. It's still a product, or if not better, then at least different. And so I came up with the idea of a grape vodka, which I'd heard discussed in Tbilisi in Georgia a decade earlier, because we were going around the brandy distillery. And the guy said, and I said, well, what did they drink before brandy? Because it was only built in 1886, I think. And they said, oh, we drank vodka. And I suddenly thought, well, this is right down at the level of Barcelona. You know, there's no big, great grain harvest here. And they said, no, we made it from grapes. We called it cha-cha. But this time we were doing an old Soviet Union regional range of Smirnoff products. So one was going to be a Georgian grape vodka. But of course, the Smirnoff people said no, so we didn't do it. But then when the Grey Goose came up, I thought, what a great idea. There's a kind of old wives' belief that you should never mix grape and grain. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm well aware of it. Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be sort of drunkenness inducing, or perhaps worse than the hangover, right?
Something like that,
Yeah.
anyway. So that was in the back of my mind. Never mix grape and grain. So therefore, if you're having wine that evening, why not have Ciroc? Why not have the grape?
So you're sticking to just grapes with both your vodka and your
Yeah.
wine.
And I would have gone ape on grape when I did. What happened was that I came up with the idea of grape vodka. I remember going to the States and doing a couple of focus groups with a bunch of third-rate concepts to compare them with grape. I hate doing that. I always focused on a single idea, never tested options and alternatives. And anyway, the Americans said, yeah, we're going to do grape vodka. But we don't want this old guy from Swiss Cottage doing it. We want to get a hotshot American innovation agency to come in and do it. So that was the end of me. And when I saw what they did with it, I was horrified. First of all, they made it from snap frost grapes. Now, I can't think of anything more stupid than to take snap frost grapes, charcoal the hell out of them, so there's no flavor whatsoever. And it's a bit like taking a Porsche and stripping it down and making a larder.
Yeah, and by the way, on that note, I have a feeling that's just bullshit anyway. Like, they're just using grapes, and they came up with the term snap frost. Maybe to begin with, they were using like grapes after the harvest, because obviously there's the ice wine process, right, where grapes freeze, you get higher sugar concentration. You ferment it, you get more alcohol.
No, that's all beyond. But I couldn't understand it. So
but I think it was probably bullshit anyway. I think they basically just came up with the term because it sounded intriguing and maybe luxury, and the use of the language like frost kind of suggests cold, icy, refreshing, snap energy.
I can see it all playing in focus groups like crazy. But I hated all that because it was complete nonsense.
Yeah.
And if there were 2 snap frost grapes in it, probably, or whatever it was. So that was the first thing they did. Then they made it French, which I thought was a total cop-out. I mean, I wanted it to be Californian.
Yeah, that would have been great. It would have really worked well, especially because the American market is where you want to attack. It then becomes a native spirit.
It came about the time that Tito was beginning to happen.
And look at what happened to that brand, right? Exactly. America needed another vodka brand beyond Smirnoff, right? It was time for it.
So it was all the beginning of the MAGA movement.
Yeah. Yeah,
the seeds sown for the MAGA. So I wanted it to be made in California, no question. And then they put it in this place, in this 500-year-old chateau in France, snapfrost grapes. Then Diddy comes along, and all of a sudden you've got all those flavors that everybody else like coconut, pineapple, stuff like
Disgusting,
that.
Yeah.
I mean, I hated Smirnoff up to that, but forget Diddy. In fact, Diddy did quite a lot to take it to the next level. But always because you looked at all the ads going back, and it was all about him. It's a bit like Stanley Tucci, bung any product in, and it will fly. So that was another thing.
But I think the thing about Diddy was that bottle could have contained any vodka liquid. It didn't need to have a grape backstory. It didn't need to have the France backstory.
No.
It was the packaging along with him, which were cohesive, I think, because it had that kind of nightclub vibe to it. Bottle service, conspicuous drinking, sparklers, all that kind of thing. Those two things alone, regardless of liquid, would have made that brand successful. So all that really happened there was the grape idea, and France just got kind of sacrificed underneath the bus because they're irrelevant to the brand.
Well, as you saw from my latest edition of my book, I mean, I wanted to not do any of the flavors that they had. Now, I wanted to do Sauvignon flavor, Riesling flavor, Concord flavor, because I think that would have been a completely. I still think if somebody picks up on grape vodka and does it my way, there's a great brand.
I think
it's
so.
Different.
I mean, imagine I think it's a great idea and one that hasn't been actualized yet. I actually Googled to see if there are any other great vodka brands, and there are a couple, but they're basically just copies of Ciroc.
Yeah.
There's one called AU, which is the chemical symbol for gold, right?
Is AU it's grape vodka?
Well, I think so. I Googled it and that came up.
Well, that's big in the UK.
Yeah, but again, it's a nightclub kind of product, all glitzy and all that sort of thing. There might have been one or two others. It's hard because once you start Googling grape vodka, you also find grape flavored vodka as well, which is
which again is Concord.
Yeah,
it's in America.
Yeah, but
I would have done this thing. I would have had onion sellers with big bunches of grapes on bicycles riding around New York. I would have had almost designed a pack where the glass is like the outside of a white grape.
Yeah, see, I was thinking about packaging for this, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool to do it so it looks something like a wine bottle, right? So you do it in California, you package it in a wine bottle style with the label and everything. You make it a little bit more discreet, a bit more premium, not sort of super traditional wine labeling, but along that line. Charge quite a lot of money, and then you, like you say, you bring in the flavored products where you've got Riesling, grape vodka, you've got Chardonnay.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the flavors become almost more important than the original.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, and I think, but what do? They look at the figures and the numbers say raspberry's big this year or
it's
peach
crazy.
is big.
Yeah.
Absolute nonsense.
Yeah, and it's just embarrassing. And then also, I mean, if you think about a martini, what's that made from? Well, it's made from vodka and it's made from vermouth, which is grape based as well. So you could really own that serve with a luxury, like really authentic grape based vodka that's not trying to appease, the high volumes in a nightclub, but instead going after craft cocktail bars and the like. And then you've got this incredible, entirely grape-based serve that is the martini. And I think you mentioned in your book.
Even when you put two white grapes, sliced white grapes in.
It's a garnish, isn't it? Instead of an olive, it's a grape,
Absolutely. I mean, I still think it could work today.
Sure, can we get some money off someone and do it? Do you know anyone?
I don't have any money, but I'd gladly give my services.
Let's see if we can make it happen. Maybe I should not put this podcast episode out. We need to get everyone who listens to it to sign an NDA.
No.
So this thinking inside the box, I think that what you described there about Tbilisi and understanding about how they traditionally made grape vodka, that's a fantastic example of it. It's like looking inwardly at what this spirit category or product category represents and looking at what fundamentally underpins it rather than trying to find some new thing from a different industry that's going to add some value to it.
Yeah, well, I suppose I've been doing new brands for so long that you get to see through all the bullshit and all those sort of fancy techniques and neuroscientific devices. I mean, I think in a way, I just tried to do that. I mean, I remember going to the Far East a lot. Can we talk about whiskey now?
Yeah.
And J&B Jet. J&B wanted to do a 12-year-old. And they already had a 12-year-old, which was, I don't know, something that looked like 1,000 other 12-year-olds. And they wanted to do something premium of rare. And I think people's perception of rare was that, I remember some Chinese people said it reminded them of biker scotch, just by looking at the label. And, everything about it was wrong.
I always think the rare seemed kind of ironic because it just wasn't very rare at all. It was kind of everywhere and oftentimes places where you didn't really want it. It was just...
Exactly. And so they said, how are we going to do the next level up? And I started with Roger's Thesaurus, which is sometimes a good source of ideas. And I look for adjectives beginning with J, or words beginning with J, because the J&B is 8 points in Scrabble. And there's no logic to this. You just look where what's available. And I came up with Jet, and I thought... And then a picture in my mind came of a guy in a white suit with Ray-Bans, 30, smart Ferrari outside. He was the first Japanese guy or Korean guy who didn't want to drink what his grandfather drank and didn't want to be the old style. And he was in IT or something like that. And Jet was, and then this brilliant designer, Howard Waller, comes up with a Jet Black label and a Jet Black bottle. So it becomes Jet Black. The Stranglers were probably quite big at the time. And if you looked at the pack, it was brilliant.
It's beautiful packaging. Is it still going? Is it still...
No, I don't think so. I've got a bottle at home, but it's a beautiful bottle, and the picture's in the... Howard was incredibly adventurous, courageous designer. He died at quite young. And there was a political thing as well. Diageo was beginning to form around then. And the agent in the distributor in Korea said, we're going to show these bastards. And they built it up to 2 million cases or something. No, 200,000 cases in a very short time. And then they got Johnnie Walker Black, so it died.
That was it. But yeah, I've never tried the product, but and to be honest with you, I'd never even heard of it until I read your book. And I saw the picture of it, and I was like, this is a really smart-looking whiskey. Not very obviously J&B at all. And
then there was the other one, which was Sub-Zero.
Oh, yes. Well, I do remember that, because that was knocking around the time when I was working for Diageo. And so please
only as an idea, not as a product.
Oh, was it not? Was it?
No.
Well, wait, what am I thinking? J&B minus
You
6?
think it's Johnnie Walker Gold?
No. Minus 6, was it?
Oh, yeah, that was rubbish. But this was...
Because gold was supposed to be served from the freezer as well, wasn't
exactly.
it? Yeah,
Now, I had this idea of, once we'd done Jet, that J&B should always be different. So the Koreans noticed that Windsor Supreme, 17-year-old, was doing well in Korea.
Yeah.
So they wanted something to compete in that area. And I always said, if you're going to compete, try and be different. And I did some experimenting with tasting whiskey from the freezer. And it's fabulous. I mean, I'm sure you've had it. It's a really delicious experience if you really like whiskey. And so I remember we designed this kind of platinum-colored pack, called it Sub-Zero. We also designed, you can see it in the book, that sort of ice block thing.
Yeah.
Which the idea came from the very first commercial on British TV in 1950 for Gibbs SR toothpaste, which shows a toothpaste and a brush in a block of ice. And I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic to have a block of ice, which would be your display piece for this product. Anyway, we do this presentation in Seoul. Oh yeah, for the first time in my life, there was an audience of 40 guys, all in dark suits, ties. And when I was introduced, they all stood up and gave me a round of applause, which was almost unheard of. And then...
As the creator of Bailey's and Jet.
And J&B Jet, yeah. And then presented the idea and showed this wonderful display unit, which lit up, and the bottle. And the lights went down and we served everybody a frozen whiskey. And then when the presentation was finished, they all stood up and gave an even louder applause. And then our guy said, well, why don't you go to the pub, have a couple of beers, and I'll come along and tell you how the meeting goes. We want to talk in our own language. So an hour later, he comes along and said, how'd it go? How'd it go? He said they absolutely hated it.
Never trust a Korean round of applause then.
No, you said they wanted a 17-year-old J&B.
Oh. So -6, and not to sort of labour that point because you weren't involved in the creation of that was supposed to be served frozen or chilled or something or other, right? So how did that differ then?
Then I'd gone by then.
Okay, yeah. Got you.
It didn't. It was just somebody saying, here's an idea, we can do it better.
Yeah. I mean, the Johnnie Walker Gold label was great. I mean, that was a great whiskey for starters. Fantastic. Probably my favourite all-time Johnnie Walker expression gold label. Had that honeycomb kind of characteristic to it. I believe it had quite a lot of a Klein Leash distillery in it. And the serve for that, for as long as I can remember, was you store it in the freezer, you pour it out frozen, and then you serve it with chocolate. And the two together was just magic. Mm-hmm. Really good. And I think part of the genius of it was that it helped initiate new people into the whiskey category, because the freezing of it, as with vodka and any other spirit you choose to freeze, it softens the alcohol a lot. It enriches the texture of it, makes it very unctuous and thick on the palate, almost Bailey's like. And then serving it with food like chocolate as well is another great way of sort of easing people in gently. Let's talk a little bit about briefs, because pretty much all of your inventions, I believe, have come off the back of a brief. Mm-hmm. So how do you kind of view, what's the difference between a good brief and a bad brief?
There wasn't any difference, really. You had to do it, whether the brief was good or not. But very few briefs came written down on bits of paper. I mean, people did not. I remember getting a brief to come up with something to compete with Red Bull. And the guy simply said, if we could come up with something that could really compete with Red Bull, we'd be onto something. Can you do it? That was the brief. Or another brief was, why don't we look at a head-on competition with Bacardi? That was the brief. There was no sort of argument. Bacardi is sitting there on its own, owning an entire category worldwide. How can you compete with it?
Now, that doesn't even stipulate that it needs to be a rum, whatever you come up with. It's just something to compete with Bacardi.
Well, we knew that Smirnoff was competing with Bacardi. And the suggestion was, why can't we produce a white rum that competes with Bacardi? Which was, again, the Bailey's brief was, the Irish want a new product.
So do you prefer to have a broader brief like that, or do you like some constraints to it?
I think it depends on the person. In other words, if some middle manager gives you a brief, it's never going to work, because it'll be 20 pages of what they want, etc. If a top manager gives you a brief, like John McGrath said, when they lost Sapphire, develop something to compete in that space. And we did. But, that's all he needed to say. We knew enough about the business. Even the Red Bull brief was manageable because you could find a way around it. And getting a brief, my tendency was to ask for some research. Give me some research. Give me some reports from focus groups that you've carried out on the subject. And we'll find the answer in there. You don't have to do anything new or spend any money. Sometimes you get ideas. I had one idea before I got the brief, which was Sheridan's. And you know the story there. But somebody had launched a coffee liqueur in Dublin, and they wanted to compete. So I was invited to go over to receive a brief with lots of whiteboards and trend figures and all that. But I had the idea on the way to the meeting. And bless them, I mean, the client, he was a guy called Pat Rigney, who I'm sure you know of.
I don't actually know.
Oh, no. Pat developed Drumshanbo, Irish gin and Irish whiskey. So he's becoming, he's going to be a major player in the next 10 years. But when I sold the idea for Sheridan's, go off the top of my head, he bought it on the spot. He said, yeah, let's do it. And you need people at the high level with a strong sense of management, not some middle, well, not even marketing people. I've found marketing people always ask questions, always debate everything. Why do you call it Bailey's? It's not typically Irish. Let's go out and ask 6
It is now. It's become typically Irish, but thanks to the brand, you know.
That was quite funny. There was a almost self-fulfilling prophecy with Bailey's when about a year after the brand was launched, we were in Dublin and went to a restaurant called the Bailey, which had been established in 1652 or whatever.
Ah, so there you go. There is some Irish heritage to it, even though that wasn't where it came from, the name.
I used to play in this pub cricket team. And every so often I have to have a brand developed, and I'd take it along on a Sunday
Do a bit
to
of
the game and have a taste afterwards. I remember somebody saying to me one day after, there's a brand called St. Ledger, which is in the book. It was the first of the Alco pops. And they tasted, and they all seemed to like it. One guy came to me and said, do you get paid for this? So I said, yeah. Why? He said, well, what's the thinking behind it? So I said, well, the biggest market of all seems to be beer. Whenever you go to a pub, everybody drinks beer. But there are people out there who don't like beer. I don't particularly like beer. But I do like the idea of a long, slightly alcoholic drink. So I suggested here that we put orange juice, a little bit of white wine, and some sparkling water to give you 3.5% ABV. Refresh you after a game of cricket. He said to me, that's so obvious. I could have thought of it. And that's what I mean, I think, by thinking inside the box. That there's just basically a logical reason for doing something which is within the remit of anyone.
Yeah, I often think some of my favourite art, like modern art, plays to that same sort of sensibility that you feel like, that's so obvious. I could have made that. Like, it's easy. But actually you didn't think of it. And it's that intention, that belief in something and the origination of it where the value is and the true creativity. But also, you know, everything's kind of borrowed, right? There's arguably no original thought. You're always influenced by something else.
Yeah.
Do you ever sort of reflect on where these ideas from? I know, for example, with Bailey's, the Kerrygold work you did was an influential factor in coming up with the cream and whiskey combination. But do you sort of reflect back and think, yeah, well, that idea came from there and this came from that and so on?
You do think back where the thought came from. I mean, for example, Sheridan's came from a bottle that was in my father's drinks cupboard. He didn't have a drinks cabinet. He just had a cupboard where there were a few bottles. And it was this double bottle of Bolts.
So it wasn't the first double bottle then, Sheridan's. There were other double bottles before.
Bolts, probably in the 1950s, produced a double bottle with 2 corks at the top. And I was walking through this bar and I saw the Guinness being poured. And that planted the seed in my mind saying, why does it have to be a brown coffee liqueur? And then when I got into the meeting, I said to the client, I can see this double bottle. One is 80% of the liquid, which will be black. The other is 20% of the liquid, which will be white. And the white comes out of a small hole, so it will trickle out. The black comes out of a big hole, so it will cascade out. So when you pour them two together, the black goes to the bottom, the white goes to the top, and you get what looks like a little Irish coffee or a miniature Guinness. And I have no technical knowledge or experience at all. I've never built anything with my hands in my life, so I just dreamed it up. And
have you had any products that you come up with where they've not been technically possible? So the idea is there, and it all sort of makes sense, but there's just pushback from the creative.
I've never been that fanciful, I don't think. You know, something that created smoke or whatever. No.
Yeah, because it's interesting because it's like products like Sheridan's and Bailey's. I think before they existed, on the face of it, might have seemed impossible. I mean, you're putting fresh cream in an ambient product that's going to sit on the shelf potentially for years. And I think Bailey's is guaranteed for a year once it's open.
18 months.
18 months,
yeah.
which is insane. I mean, obviously there's alcohol and sugar there, which act as a preservative, but it's, you know, a pretty impressive technical endeavor to have made all of that sit shelf stable and not coagulate into a horrible mess within minutes of opening.
Well, I asked two questions. Mac McPherson, again, was the man who made Bailey's possible, technically. And I said to him two questions. First question was, when we launched in 1974, if where we are now, this was 10, 12 years later, it was 100, where were we then? He said 49. So they introduced the product. They weren't absolutely sure that if you went into Tucson, Arizona, in the middle of summer, in a hot warehouse, you know, whether it would survive. And the other question I said was, what did you think of our original sample? He said, I thought it was utterly disgusting.
Yeah. Do you want to, let's maybe touch on the Bailey story now and so fill in the gaps there on that whole process.
Sure. Well, we'd been an ad agency for 3 years and we'd done okay. We got work from Bird's Eye and Lever Brothers, and IDV was our sort of bankroller client. And we moved into this office in Dean Street. We both had children and responsibilities. He was a bit older than me. I think we had been earning about $5,500 a year in the ad agency, which was quite good money then. And we got this brief. The brief came from the Irish foreign finance minister, who said that any brands that were developed primarily for export would be given a 10-year tax holiday. So he talked to the head of Gilbey's of Ireland, who then talked to the management at IDV UK, which is the world management, who talked then to Tom Jago, who gave me a call on a Friday afternoon. He said, oh, the Irish want a new brand. So I said, well, what kind? Oh, I don't know. He said, we've been messing around with liqueurs, and R&D have come up with some kind of honey and heather mixtures and stuff. Something like that. And nobody said, you have to do it, or it's got to be done by Tuesday, or it's the most important new brand you're ever going to develop. It was just another job. And so I thought about it over the weekend, because that's what I did. And I remember calling Hugh. Arrived 10 o'clock on Monday morning, and I'm irate because I've been there for 2 hours. I said, what are we going to do about this effing Irish brief? And he said, oh, what Irish brief? We've been talking about it the previous day. Anyway, he said, what happens if you mix Irish cream and Irish whiskey? So I said, and I was cross now, so I grabbed it. I said, let's go down to the local supermarket and look around. And we bought some Jameson, and we bought some cream and brought back to the office, mixed it together. It tasted like horrible. But I said, there's something there still. We went back to the supermarket, bought some Cadbury drinking chocolate, found some, added some sugar, played around with proportions, although I had no idea what they were, and I had a product. So I called up Tom Jago and said, look, can I come and see you? And went over to York Gate in a cab, thinking of my foreplay and the story and the justification. And he just grabbed the bottle and said, let me taste that. And he did. And he said it was great. He said it was really terrific. And he said, we'll go up to Harlow later in the week and show it to the technical guys, which we did. And he said at the same time, let's get the branding moving. And of course, the branding, you need a name. And we were moving office at that time from Dean Street to Greek Street, right next to a pub called the Pillars, and also Milroy's.
Pillars of Hercules. That's
Pillars of Hercules and Milroy's liquor store was also. And we were walking along the street, and I remembered the guy who ran the Kerrygold operation was a very famous Irishman called Tony O'Reilly. Have you heard of him?
No, don't think so.
Well, his fame came in many parts. Firstly, he was a Lions rugby player. At the age of 19, I saw him play in Johannesburg for the British and Irish Lions. He then became, at 28, the general manager of the Irish Dairy Board. And he was tasked with the responsibility of transforming Irish butter from a commodity which commanded no price to a brand. And Kerrygold was the result of that. Somebody told me afterwards that there were actually no cows in Kerry, but that didn't seem to matter. But what he did for me was he imbued me with the sense of, national cause, developing a brand to sort out the Irish economy. It was fantastic. And so I became imbued with Irishness and the cows and pastures and stuff like that. And one of the things O'Reilly said to me over a drink one night was, if you ever come up with a brand name that requires an Irish family name, don't take one like mine, his, which was O'Reilly's. I said, why not? He said, because they sound whimsical, unserious.
Yes.
And for an Irishman
cliched, almost.
To say it against himself was...
Yes, right. Yeah, you've got to take that seriously, haven't you?
He became the richest man in Ireland. He lost millions trying to restore water-fed glass and Wedgwood pottery. But he married a woman who was even richer than he was, so... But he was a great man. He died last year, and he was an incredible human being. He could walk into a room with 1,000 people and completely captivate them. And so anyway, we were going along to look at this office, and right below the office was this restaurant called Bailey's Bistro. And I thought, that's it. And I think if you really believe in what you do, you think about brands 24/7. You wake up thinking of brand names and thinking of ideas. And Bailey's was in my head, and the brand name issue was in my head. And I knew we couldn't design a label until we had a name. And Bailey's was it. So I phoned Tom up and said, I've got it, Bailey's. I think it's terrific. It just works. And Tom said, bless him, yes, let's go with it. And so that was the next stage. And then we had a secretary who said, my husband's a designer, and we live on a houseboat in the Thames at Kingston. Just called him up, said, I want you to design me a label. Imagine a Kerrygold ad, but looking more expensive. He said, he sent me 12 labels via his wife about a week later. And Tom, Hugh and I looked at them and we all said, that's the one, which is the one we chose.
What were so the one you chose is like cows on a kind of pasture, right?
It's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book. And we'll get it up on the screen. So what were the other options? Were they of a similar ilk? Or
they were all sort of similar.
Yeah.
But I can't even remember. He probably got them still. And 300 guineas, I think he charged.
For a brand that ended up doing, what was it? What is Bailey? 16?
8 million
8
cases.
million cases, yeah. So, I mean, it's a remarkable story. would be less remarkable had Big Bailey's not gone on to be what it was, of course, and you wouldn't have known at the time.
Well, there are a couple of other stories relating to the brand. One was we're going with Bob's label now. The Bailey's name is going. We decided to do some focus groups, which were quite rare in those days. And we got two responses. One is in the male group. One guy stood up and said, "It's a girly drink. I wouldn't be, I like my pints and I like my shorts, but I wouldn't drink this." And all the other guys, of course, said, "Oh, yeah, of course, we wouldn't either." But all the glasses were empty. And
I mean, I still do that now. If there happens to be Bailey's knocking around at Christmas, that's normally when it appears for a lot of people, I think. And my wife gets a bottle in, and I'm like, "It's not for me." And then I'll have a sip, and I'm like, "It's pretty good, actually."
And then the next thing that happened was we shoved a couple of bottles into a pub just north of Marylebone Road called the Allsop Arms. I don't know if you know of it.
No.
But as you're crossing over from Gloucester Place, it's on the left-hand side, just before the square where Lord's used to be. And I had a call a couple of weeks ago from the new guy who's taken it over, and he said he'd been doing research on it and hadn't realised that his pub was the first place ever to. So he's putting up a plaque and stuff like that.
One of the round blue London plaques. That's what it is.
Yeah. And great guy. But I used to go in it. Fortunately, I live up near Swiss Cottage, and so York Gate to Swiss Cottage, I had to get a bus.
Yeah, not too far.
So I would call in at the pub and say, "Any luck?" No.
Yeah.
Then one night, two policemen came and demolished a whole bottle. And we thought, that's it. That shows the brand works.
Wow.
I went to Dublin.
It seems like a lot of these ideas come very fast, and almost complete. So how do you go about charging for your time for these things? I realize you're not on commission. It's just a flat rate for the idea. But when something comes so quickly, I mean, I guess there's documentation and supporting copywriting and all that kind of stuff that has to happen too. But how do you place a value on something that comes so easily to you and yet clearly is unavailable to everyone else? Otherwise, they'd have had the same idea.
Well, I mean, somebody asked me how much we got paid for Bailey's, and I think we got £3,000.
Is that a lot for then? 1972, was it? 71?
Well, I think we were paid £1,000 a month as a retainer. So we figured it was 3 months. It took 3 months of our time. It probably didn't take anything like 3 months.
Yeah.
I got paid more as I mean, it bought me 35 years working in the most interesting field in the world.
Yeah, I guess it's the foot firmly in the door for the next 2 or 3 decades to develop more stuff because of the success of Bailey's.
Yeah, and then you get kind of credibility. But it took 7 years for Bailey's to really get noticed, I think. But I think that the thing about IDB was they had an incredible management structure. Because most successful innovation was instigated by people at the top of the organization. You get the finance director saying, "I want to develop a brand." And these guys were more interested in money than... and they also had an unwritten law which said, you are going to fail, but if you are going to fail quickly and don't spend too much money doing it. Fail cheaply.
Yeah.
And that was important. I got 65 years of traveling the world, first class, business class, Concorde, going to countries I'd never dream of going to, and working in a field that I just loved doing, because I always felt every brief was solvable, even when it didn't look as if it was.
Do you prefer to come up with new brands or work on line extensions of existing brands?
I don't like line extensions at all, no. Wasn't called upon to do that much. Well, sometimes, I was with Jet trying to reshape J&B. But I'm a huge believer in product. And I think not many marketing people are. Marketing are interested in brand. I'm interested in product, which is the kind of foundation of the brand.
When you say product, you mean the liquid combined with the brand?
The liquid and the story behind it. I mean, there's a lovely story. During lockdown, I just turned 80-something, and I thought I'll try something really cheeky. I'll send an email to Ivan Menezes, who was the then CEO of Diageo. Now, I barely knew him. I'd met him once, I think, briefly. And he may have known a bit about me through my book. But I sent him a note saying how to make J&B great again, which I thought was a pretty appropriate headline.
Be a weird cap, though, if it was MJ and BGA.
Something like that, yeah. Anyway, I thought, what's to lose? So I sent it on a Sunday because I figured so one day he might read his own emails.
Smart.
And to my utter surprise, I got a response. Thank you very much. Really interested in what you have to say. I would like to put you together with my US marketing guys. So, okay, great, we're on. So I get writing documents and stuff like that in between doing my Joe Wicks exercises. And so I send this off to the marketing guys. I meet 5 people, I think. Far too many. And the idea was really simple one. I said, almost the ultimate way of judging the high quality spirit is in the martini. That martini glass is such an iconic symbol.
Nowhere to hide as well for a spirit in a martini.
Exactly. So, and I said, why has nobody ever done a whiskey martini? And I was thinking of J&B. When I started, it was 3 million cases in the US and the #1 brand on sale there. And when I finished, it's doing 50,000 cases or something. And obviously Diageo changed and priorities are different, and Johnnie Walker Black's the major drive, etc. But I felt there was a residual affection for J&B in New York particularly. So I conjured up a plan. I said, okay, what we're going to do is that our lead guy is going to be a gin distiller, because gin people know about martinis. And Jim Beveridge, you probably know him, a great man. He knows every whiskey distillery in Scotland.
It's a former master blender of Johnnie Walker.
Exactly. And I wanted Jim to work for, well, forget the gin guy's name.
Tom Nicol at Tanqueray, was it? Or no, he'd probably left by that point, hadn't he?
No, it was a Tanqueray guy. It's a really good guy, actually.
I'm not sure who the master distiller of Tanqueray is these days.
Well, I think he may not be there now. But anyway,
Tom Nicol, I think, left Tanqueray coming up to 10 years ago now.
No, this guy's different name. Can't remember the name. Anyway, so I actually had a meeting with him, and I said, look, I want the team to be like this. I want it to be gin distillery's the boss. Jim Beveridge works for him and finds these odd whiskies that will make up the perfect martini. You get a great mixologist, joins the team as well. And the last member of the team is going to be the head of the on-trade business in the UK, in the US.
In the US.
Somebody like Philip Duff would have been, someone who knew his way around the on-trade. We're going to do no consumer research at all. We're not testing anything. We're only going to do what we're going to do because we think it's the best. And then we're going to, and they would produce it, and they would be involved in what we call it, and they would have the final call off on the packaging and the liquid. No research at all, and then we get so we've got 4 really key guys buying into it, and
Minimal cost as well. Minimal cost to set it up because you're not doing any
absolutely
research.
no marketing people, no research, no testing hundreds of things against consumers. It would be they could do the whole thing in 2 months, I think, and if you locked them away for a weekend, they could do it in a weekend. And anyway, I spent about 11 months. I talked to design companies, etc. And I got a note after, I think, 11 months saying, we don't think it fits in with our priorities, which are doing turnip-flavoured Smirnoff and stuff like that. And
It's an interesting proposition, a sort of crossover between gin and whiskey, designed to sort of tempt martini drinkers, be it vodka or gin, towards darker spirits. And I think J&B is a good brand for it, and primarily because from my point of view, it's always been associated as a pretty light style of whiskey anyway. So it sort of fits that. And I mean, I think just certain Japanese whiskies also spring to mind as candidates for that sort of treatment as well, given that a lot of Japanese whiskies traditionally have been intended for highballs and therefore are quite light in style and quite elegant, quite floral, which is the sort of characteristics you're going to want in a whiskey that is masquerading as a gin, also to a certain extent.
no, it's not a whiskey that's masquerading as a gin. It's in a sense, you have cocktails. I mean, a martini is a cocktail, and this is a cocktail, a martini cocktail made with whiskey. You can make it with gin, you can make it with vodka. I don't know why white rum never got into martinis either.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, there is already a whiskey martini. It's a Manhattan. You know, it tends to be made with sweet vermouth instead of dry vermouth, but the drink already exists, made with maybe the American whiskey, bourbon or rye. It just doesn't have the name martini. They're all born out of the same fundamental family of cocktails, vermouth plus spirit. Rum, yeah, it doesn't seem to play quite so well with vermouth. There are exceptions, but it's also, I think there's a cultural thing there as well. You know, gin and whiskey are both, although gin obviously has its origins in Europe, they both feel like very American inventions, especially bourbon whiskey. So, and you know, that style of drink with vermouth plus spirit is an American invention as well. So I think that they lend themselves quite well to it. It's a neat fit. So yeah, I think there'd be some sort of like terminology considerations about it. I have to get this file out of the way. Because some people will be like, well, that's a Manhattan you're trying to sell me, or actually it's a Rob Roy.
It wouldn't be a Manhattan because I know Manhattan is full, quite sweet.
Yeah, I mean it's
a martini's got a dry character.
Yeah, sure. Although the original Manhattans weirdly were made with dry vermouth, and then sweet sort of came afterwards.
Yeah.
So you know, it's sort of toying with that whole thing. I get the idea, although I do think
it's not sold in a martini glass, is it?
It is. Yeah. Manhattan served in a martini glass. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's a place for it. I mean, if you think about Geneva, Philip Duff would no doubt have something to add to this. Some Genevas, I think, sit somewhere between kind of blended whiskey and gin in their style. And you're kind of like trying to get into that particular sort of flavor region, I would say, with the blended whiskey that you'd produce with J&B. But anyway...
No, I just wanted the J&B with a hint of genius.
Yeah.
You know, like Lille with the vodka martini and stuff like that. Just a hint of genius.
Yeah. You mentioned a few times about being quite singular with the idea, not doing too much sort of consumer testing, not really deviating from the initial plan. Has that ever backfired? Have you ever had products where you're like, damn, if only we'd kind of done a few more focus groups, we might have actually weeded out the issue here?
We did research on most of our brands, but the difference was that I tended to do it, not some outside researcher. And I was looking for times when we'd maybe made a mistake. that we hadn't thought of. And I remember doing that brand called St. Ledger, which is the Alco Pop. The initial name was Prost or Prost.
Which is cheers in like Polish, is it?
German or whatever. One of those languages. Anyway, I wanted it to sound like beer. And I remember doing a couple of focus groups, and the girl said, I think the product's super, but I hate the name. So I said, why? She said, oh, well, it's going up to a bar and asking for a bottle of Prost. But immediately, all she had to say was that, and I thought she was right. And
Does sound like abbreviation of
she said it sounds like prostitute.
Yeah, it does
prostate.
a little bit, yeah. Prostate as well, yeah.
And she was absolutely right, and we changed it to St. Ledger the next day. But and a lot of these things are, you just do what you do with names and stuff. Everybody said, well, have you looked at other names, or have you done this, or have you done that? But I think you can only do what we did if you have people who are going to buy the ideas.
Yeah, this seems to be kind of key to a lot of these stories, is that there was clearly a great working relationship and a confidence in everyone's abilities to see these things through, whether it's from the IDV stroke Diageo side, where clearly, for the most part, and exceptions exist. We've talked a little bit about Ciroc and to some extent Smirnoff Black and Tanqueray 10, but they gave you the brief, you came up with a great idea, and they knew that they could believe in that idea and run with it and trust in it without having to tamper with it, without having to put it through 100 different filters of people's opinions, finance, brand team, etc., etc. That feels like that's the sort of secret sauce to what your working relationships during those sort of decades of the 70s, 80s.
Well, it's 35 years.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely, that was the solution to it. It would never have worked if we'd gone through a traditional marketing route. That's why, looking back, there were no marketing people engaged in, because it's the questions, well, what happens if we do this, or what happens if we do that? I mean, what you deliver as a brand, a liquid with a story, a package, which hopefully is good. And I read a piece yesterday on LinkedIn about detail being important. That, if you design a brand, look at every tiny element of it and try and make it better. And we did that with, we developed that rum to compete with Bacardi called Stubbs.
Yes.
Which everything about it was right, except
Australian, was it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we messed up the politics. We didn't engage the Aussies and we didn't engage the Yanks. But you do stupid things sometimes. A nice little story about Bailey's. By now, it was the year that Bailey's was going into production. And it was about July. And I had a call from David Dunn, who was the CEO of the company, and the man who made the brand, I think, because he really gave his life to it. And he said to me, we can't just call it Bailey's, can we? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's got to have initials of some kind. And it was the Open Golf was on at the time, and I was looking at the sports page in the office, and they had something about R and A pronounced on pin placements or something. So I said, well, why don't we give it two initials? Let's call it R and A Bailey. And he, being a golfer, said, I love it. And you see, those decisions were taken instantly.
Yes.
Rather than having to go through meetings. And
so your advice for some of these companies that are trying to, these days it seems, acquire brands rather than innovate internally, would be to just cut out all the chaff, like create a leaner team of people working on these things so that there's less cooks to spoil the broth and these decisions can be made fast.
I think that worked for us. Now I gather they have sort of massive innovation hubs all over the place, and their jobs are to integrate brands that they buy.
Yeah.
And
But that seems to be the kind of de facto way it's done these days. I mean, there's been 3 or 4 million case selling brands developed internally by big companies in the last 50 years. Bailey's being one of them. Hendrick's Gin, I think, maybe around the million case mark. That was obviously William Grant. And then Monkey Shoulder, I don't think is at that level, but that nevertheless was an
that's
internal.
done pretty well.
It's done very well, yeah. And then I think Malibu would fit in there as well. That was 70s as well, wasn't it?
Well, Malibu was a great story. I mean, Malibu started its life in South Africa. The South Africans are great pirates of ideas. They look around the world to see what's going and adapt it. And they found a brand in America in the 60s called Coco Rico. Coco Reeb. I think it might still be there. It's a coconut spirit with a
There's
white...
Coco Canoe is another coconut spirit. Coco Canoe?
Possibly, but this was Coco Reeb.
Okay.
And it was developed by National Distillers. And they liked the look of it, so they said...
And where was that made? Where was that made? Coco Reeve.
Right at Puerto Rico or something.
But it was a rum base.
It's something like that, or it's a spirit base.
Yeah.
So anyway, the South Africans did Coco Reeb, Rico. But the lawyers didn't like that. They said it's too close to, and the pack was a rip-off almost. So IDV UK picked a name which I think I'd come up with for something completely different, Malibu.
Oh, you'd come up with a name for something else, had you?
Okay, came up with the name for in the 60s there was a thing called pop wine, fruit wines. They were big in the States in the 60s, and we came up with a Mauritian passion fruit wine called Malibu for no other reason. And somebody at IDV UK picked it up and said, let's call it Malibu. And it worked. And they did the same thing with Archers when Peachtree flew through the air.
That's another big million, over a million case
That
brand.
went to 2 million cases in 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
And I was in Holland.
Don't tell me you came up with a name for that as well. Did you come up with a name for Archers as well? You didn't, did you?
No, nothing to do with me.
Because you'd have had the 3 there, wouldn't you?
Oh, nothing to do with me on Archers, no. Archers was developed by IDV's Canadian company. And, well, the Kuipers recently bought it, so it's now going to be integrated with Peachtree.
Shall we talk a little bit about non-alc?
Do you want to talk about non-alc?
Maybe let's start with your forays into non-alc, because you were doing it long before it was kind of a trend, well, the current trend, with a couple of different products, right?
Well, this was in the 80s, and Tom Jago had gone, and a guy called Tim Ambler, who was a very senior guy, he was global marketing director, took over the brand development department. And he said, I think alcohol is going to come into threat, both medically and in terms of drink drive. I think, and we were also amazed at Perrier. Here were people buying soda water for £1. It just seemed ridiculous.
Yeah.
Perrier was so successful. So Tim said, why don't we develop some added value non-alcoholic drinks? So I said, is that it? No, that was it. I mean, that was the brief. But you were dealing with somebody that you might have a curry with once a month. So you were talking all the time. And so we did a sports drink, because we all quite like sport in the team. And we looked at all these sports drinks, and they were quite high in calories because they had to build you up. So we thought, why don't we develop a sports drink which had no calories and put back the minerals exercise takes on.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought out a brand called Dexter's. And then we had this brilliant idea that the best place to sell it was in places where people could buy it. So we sold it in health clubs and sports, and we sponsored fun runs and stuff. And then he said, I want you to do another one now. So I said, what's the brief? He said, well, make it more for women. That's all. I mean, it's a longer conversation than that.
Dexter sounds quite masculine, doesn't it?
Well, it's sport and exercise and stuff, so I still think it's a good idea because, instead of having a Diet Coke when you go into a pub, which says you're fat, as for Dexter's, which said you're
conscientious about your...
you're sporting.
Yeah.
You're a cool guy. I mean, the can was the tread of a running shoe.
My son's called Dexter, by the way, so I'm going to tell him that you said he's cool by proximity.
He's called Dexter.
Yeah.
Well, there's a drink in there.
I know, yeah.
And
it doesn't exist anymore, though, does it? It's not. The brand doesn't exist anymore, does it? Dexter's. No.
So we did that, and then Tim said, well, this took about 3 months, which is long for us. And he said, look, he said, imagine me at the smartest club in town. I'm surrounded by 6 top models, all of which would be a foot taller than he was. And he said, I want us all to be drinking this drink. I said, well, what's it going to be? He said, look, you're the guys, you're paid to do it. You think of it. And it happened quite by accident one day. I was on the phone to the gas board, and the girl who worked with me at the time was reading a book called The Joy of Beauty by Leslie Kenton. And in it she talked about the Western and the Eastern diets, and the Western diet was based on food that formed acid ash in the bloodstream, and the Eastern diet used foods that produced alkaline ash in the bloodstream. And it was all there, and I thought, God, we'll produce a high alkaline drink. And there were lots of sort of ingredients that I wrote them all down and told the technical guys to stick them in, like infusions of sunflower seeds and stuff like that. And they came up with this fantastic product, which was slightly difficult. I remember a journalist in one of the papers described it as liquid lipstick. But it was nothing like Red Bull, for example.
No.
It had a rather subtle, sophisticated herbal taste. And the last thing I needed was a name. And I remember I was sharing an office with a design company at the time, and I walked into reception and said, this is a product that's all about giving you balance. I had a picture in my mind of you went out for a Big Mac at McDonald's, you could have this and it would take the curse off it a bit. And the receptionist said, well, Libra means balance. And I thought, Aqua Libra. So we called it Aqua Libra. And it took off. It was hugely successful.
It's a really cool looking product as well. The original packaging, it had a sort of Roman or Greek vibe about it, quite Mediterranean looking, sort of decorative. It reminds me of one of the Greek goddesses or something like that.
Well, the story is in the book. And I mean, the same guy that did Bailey's, Bob Wagner, did this one.
Totally different looking packaging though.
Yeah. I phoned him up again and said, look, we need this by Friday. We were going to New York and we'll be back on Friday morning. We need this to sell the idea to the board. And when we got back, this was on Mac's desk, and it was perfect. And it became the label.
And then the brand has somewhat changed in the years that followed, right? I mean, they've rebranded it now. It just looks very generic looking, kind of salsa type thing.
If you read the piece in the book, it was how to turn a Bugatti into a Vauxhall Viva, which is exactly what they've done.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, it's so anonymous looking now. It just kind of blends into anything else, where that original packaging was just so striking. And what year are we talking about when that was released?
84.
So, I mean, so ahead of its time. What you're describing there sounds it just sounds like the marketing plan for a lot of sort of modern health tonic type drinks that
Well, we
see.
did lots of things that we had. We did Dexter's, Dexter's wasn't on strategy eventually. It was, so then we did Aqua Libra, then we did Purdey's.
Yeah.
And Purdey's, the idea was to give you vitality without high caffeine or high sugar. So Purdey's done quite well, bought by Britvic, as you know.
And that's still going, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get it in the aluminium can bottle, don't you? And it's a very unique looking brand.
That was Howard Waller, the same guy who did Jet, did the pack.
Yeah. And was that post Red Bull or before Red Bull?
Before Red Bull.
Before Red Bull. But I mean, of the similar lines, right? I mean, didn't taste the same, but nevertheless, it was a sort of a kind of not an energy drink as such, but a sort of vitality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had the idea, we had a strategy for this as well. Now, it was all beginning to firm up. So our strategy with this one was to target the entertainment business. So I remember the first case we sold was to Abbey Road Studios. And I remember David Putnam, who ran film, was a huge fan of it. And then we did a thing called FAFS, PFAFFS.
Oh, yes. I saw that in the book, yeah.
And that one didn't succeed.
That's a weird name, though.
It was a perfect name.
Is it? Because it sounds a bit like faff, as in nuisance, annoying. I know it's spelt differently, but...
No, well, you see, you've talked about it.
I've talked about it, that's
Exactly.
right. So are you of the kind of mind that all PR is good PR, even negative PR is good PR then, as long as someone's talking about it?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Look at Liquid Death.
That's true, although they've just pulled out of the UK, I think, haven't they, Liquid?
Yeah.
Sadly, because I love that brand.
Yeah, me too. And the other one was, the other one we did, which I thought was a fantastic brand, was called IQ.
Yeah.
This came from the UK sales director who wanted to compete with Red Bull. So I said, well, let's not compete with all of Red Bull. Let's compete with part of it. So the part we competed with was mental energy. And I found something called nootropics.
Yes.
Back in the 2000s. Now, this is 20 years ago. Now it's becoming very popular.
It's a buzzword, yeah.
And if you look at the pack, it's in the book there. It looked a bit like the Minions. And a lot of, when I published that on LinkedIn, people say, oh, it's a rip-off. And I said, no, it's not, because it was developed 10 years before.
Let's talk about the current state of the non-alc market. I know you've been pretty vocal about your take on it, so let me give you the stage to be vocal once again. What do you think of the state of non-alc and what it offers or doesn't offer?
I think beer kind of makes sense because the gap between 0 and 5 or 4 or 3 isn't all that great, and you can compensate formulating by adding bitterness to beer. So I can see that, and I can see this zebra thing, where you drink 1 pint of one and
zebra striping. Yeah, you alternate between.
Because I think people in this category don't want to give up; they just want to have better control. The wines I don't think have worked. I think if I were doing a non-alcoholic wine, I'd cheat. In other words, if you sell something in a wine bottle that looks like wine, people are going to drink it as wine. I would use basic grape juice, grape must, and I would add flavors to replicate the sensation of wine. So you could replicate the taste, I'm sure, and do a very good job, but they won't cheat. And I think that's a mistake. You call it a mixture of grape juice and chemical. You put
natural flavors,
clean
grape
flavors
juice,
in.
Yeah.
You put clean chemicals in.
I'm yet to encounter anything that tastes decent in the non-alc wine space.
No, I agree.
I suppose there's certain kombucha products that I think maybe kind of sit there and are pretty good. You know, a few of them being served in champagne bottles, like full-size formats that are pretty good. They're not really trying to go after non-alc wine, or maybe they are, but they're not stating that as their intention. They're not marketed as non-alc wines. They're marketed as kombucha. But as a stand-in for wine, I think some of them work pretty well, and they have a flavor profile that is decidedly adult as well. It's not clearly not a soft drink.
Kombucha's okay because it's not claiming to be anything other than kombucha.
Yeah.
I experimented 40 years ago with something called papain, which you get in pineapple. And papain is incredibly good at breaking down and digesting food. I don't know why somebody hasn't done that. The trouble is that people are getting too close to the reality.
So what, it's something that's in pineapple juice, that's like an enzyme or something that helps?
Pineapple has an enzyme called papain,
Right.
which breaks down and digests food.
Okay. So you're saying using that in a
Well, that would be a functional drink that has nothing to do with wine, which, might work.
Yeah.
I'd love to have a go at that if I'm...
I'll add that to the shopping list, pineapples.
And... But the spirit thing, I think, is, as I said in the book, to me, it's all about the money. It's all about this ridiculous amount of money where you're expected to pay £45 for 70 centilitres worth of, where the main ingredient is either water or cider vinegar. Cider vinegar costs £1 a pop in Tesco, £1 a litre or something in Tesco, and then you charge more than single malt whiskey. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people's problem, is that it does seem expensive given that there's no duty to be paid on these products like there is on a spirit. It's £8 a bottle in duty for every product, if not more, depending on for every spirit product, depending on the ABV, of course. And the non-alc producers will push back by saying, well, actually, it's possibly harder for us to make this, depending on their process, because we have to, first of all, ferment, then remove alcohol out.
I don't buy that. I mean, I think if you make gin, Gordon, I had Gordon Zero during Christmas, the year before last, and it tasted like gin-flavoured water.
Yes, which is what it is.
You don't need to distill it.
You don't need to distill it. No, you don't. No, I agree with you on that. I suppose let me find another way to push back. I suppose one of the other things about the price of non-alcs is that in the on-trade, they're there to fit an occasion wherein someone wants to be out socializing and drinking, but they don't want to be drinking alcohol. And for that reason, they have to sit, or should sit, at a price point that is similar to their alcoholic counterparts, because they then add, from the consumer's point of view, they add value into the occasion. They're not just buying a lime and soda that costs £1. They're buying a cocktail that costs 10 quid.
I gave two solutions to that, which I thought were much more user-friendly. One was, why don't the soft drinks people get into it? I mean, Schweppes London Dry Tonic could be gin-flavoured tonic. I mean,
Sure.
but it would be super premium for Schweppes, but a lot cheaper for the consumer. And the other way was that they could do Kentucky Cola. They could do Mexican orange juice. It's not difficult to do.
Yeah.
They're probably doing it already. And the other one I had was, well, what's wrong with Angostura? If I went drinking, I'd take an Angostura in my pocket and just add it to tonic.
Like a little mini sachet of ketchup, just dice some in, yeah.
It's 10 quid a bottle, and you get 150 drinks.
Oh, you get a lot of flavour out of a bottle of Angostura bitters, that's for sure.
And you could do, you don't have to do it for bitter, you could do it for gin, whiskey, tequila, anything.
Yeah, I guess going back to what I was saying though about price and value, I mean, I get you 100%. And I think at home, those sort of products will work really well because I want something that tastes like a gin and tonic that doesn't have alcohol in it. And why should that cost more than £1 a serve, Why should it cost more than a bottle of tonic water a serve? Because what is tonic water? It's water that's flavored with sugar and quinine and whatever else. Why would it cost more to flavor that with juniper and angelica and coriander, and therefore it's a gin and tonic in a bottle? But I do think in a bar environment, and it's not necessarily like the producer of the non-alc is obviously making the margin here, because it doesn't cost as much to make a product like that in general. It could have been the bar that's instead kind of adding in the additional margin. But I do think there's something to be said for the product costing similar amounts to an alcoholic product in terms of the perception from the consumer as to what they are getting over the bar. And if we walked into this bar and I wanted a non-alc whiskey and soda, which is made with some non-alc whiskey alternative, and it only cost me £2.50 while my friends are drinking £10 highballs, that says something about the quality of what I'm getting, even though the quality is not really part of it. It's value, isn't it? It feels like I'm getting a lower value product.
I think people have been drawn in by that. I don't know. There's cleverer people than me can solve that problem. But
so we've talked a lot about various products you've come up with and some of the sort of challenges you faced. I guess solutions for overcoming those challenges as you see it. Putting it all together, what do you sort of feel is your proudest achievement as a product?
Difficult. I think Smirnoff Black goes. It didn't achieve much. Piat d'Or I loved, because Piat d'Or happened about the same time as Bailey's. But it changed the way people thought about wine in the UK.
We haven't talked about Piat d'Or. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit on?
Well, this is very simple. I think at the time, people in this country knew very little about wine. I think the definition of a heavy user, heavy users tend to account for 80% of consumption. 20% of people account for 80% of consumption. So heavy users at that time drank 2 bottles a month.
Really?
2 bottles a month.
Oh, that's just an afternoon.
That's taking the average, that's a lunch. I mean, taking the average population.
That's a conservative lunch. That's a pretty relaxed.
Yeah. And maybe on your own. Anyway, you looked at Anthony Tennant, who was the head of IDV at the time, and the posh dude, he was an old Etonian, and he said, I want to produce a French wine brand that will introduce a mass market into wine. Because wine was moving slowly, and it was all, people who'd had wine in their background and stuff like that. Average people didn't. I mean, people in those days, the 60s and 50s, would regard having even a bottle of beer on the table as being a bit off. But the trouble with French wines was it was too confusing. The names were unpronounceable. The labels were indecipherable. And the products were take it or leave it, high tannic, tough. And we wanted to do something that would cut through all that. And the IDV had a brand called Piat they bought, Piat de Beaujolais. Great start, 4-letter word, P-I-A-T. Good start. And so we would use, and the bottle shape was unusual. It was like a Indian club. And we said we're going to use Piat. We're going to use the Piat. And then I remember that I'd done some research into cigarettes, and people said that during the middle of the week they smoked cheap cigarettes, and at weekends they smoked Benson and Hedges because they were showing off to their friends and special. So we took the B&H label, the gold idea, put it on the Piat bottle, and it was perfect, Piat d'Or. And then was one of my greatest achievements I got a bottle of Blue Nun, sweet, drinkable German white wine. Went down to the supermarket and bought some food colouring, added it to Blue Nun so that it became a red wine. I went to a French winemaker and said, I want you to make a French wine that tastes like that. And that became Piet d'Or Red. And it absolutely took off.
Did the French winemaker realise that they had red food-coloured Blue Nun?
I didn't meet the winemaker, somebody else did it.
I reckon you'd be a dead man if they knew what it was you'd handed them.
Well, it earned me the accolade. There were a lot of hooray Henrys in the wine business in those days, at IDV particularly. And someone said to me, you know, I wouldn't serve Piet d'Or to one of our servants. He said, you, my dear fellow, have the palate of a plumber. Which I walked away thinking how proud I was. I mean, I have this dislike of wine people because I think they have no perspective on their product at all. They treat it as a kind of philosophy or a religion, not as a product. I mean, 80% of wine is sold in supermarkets.
Yes, but then I guess, is there something to be said for a sort of like pyramid system here where, not a pyramid scheme, but you have this sort of top 10, 20% who are like evangelical about it and treat it with the, you know, all this sort of geekery and detail and attention. And that filters down to the 80% who are buying in supermarkets. They might not understand it the same way, appreciate it the same way, but they're aware that there's something about wine that requires a lot of respect and attention and inquiry. And they kind of have aspirations to be that. They're never going to be that. They probably realize they're never going to be that. But knowing that that is there makes wine desirable.
I remember people coming to my house knowing that I was working in the drinks business and apologetically offering a wine. I don't know what this is like. Little realizing that I knew even less what it was like. And
how did you react to that? Did you sort of, you know, nosing it like, yeah.
No. No, don't go in for that kind of thing.
What have you seen recently that you've liked? Any products that have stood out? Anything new that...
Oh, Liquid Death, because I didn't think I could have thought of it, I suppose. Not many stuff that... I'm quite intrigued by 7% wines, although I don't think they're quite... I always had this idea in the book about having a wine that had the equivalent alcohol to a pint of beer.
Yeah.
So that you and your wife could go out and share a bottle and be equivalent to 2 halves.
Yeah. It's a nice idea, the idea of starting and finishing a bottle and not being kind of, you know, on your way to drunkenness by the end of it. Just, you know, a kind of pretty social, acceptable amount, possibly even so little that you could get in a car and drive it or whatever. But you have that sort of feeling of having shared a bottle rather than...
Yeah.
So there is something in that, isn't there? Like when you both just have a glass of wine, it doesn't feel like they've come from the same place because they're typically poured somewhere else. Whereas when the bottle is on the table, you have that conviviality of pouring for each other.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if it's 5%, but again, cheat. Bung some stuff in to boost the flavour.
Make a really strong tasting wine.
I mean, don't put any
down.
carcinogenic things in, but, you know, put some flavours in. Get a flavour house to do a cocktail that would work.
There's a lot of good ideas that are coming out just from this conversation. I think we've got the martini whiskey, we've got the lower strength wine. What was the other one we were talking about? Oh, the grape vodka, I think, is really strong. And it's so funny that it's kind of been done so poorly, really, that the opportunity still exists and no one's... You would think that Napa Valley, some winemaker there might have thought, you know what, I'm going to buy a still and start making Californian grape vodka at a high level. Why has that not happened?
I don't know. and I refuse to believe it's a bad idea. I just think it's pusillanimous. I mean, I think, why isn't there not a Tito?
Who knows? All right, anything else to say apart from buy the book? It's fantastic.
If you're going to show a picture, show the new one, not the old one, please.
I will. I'll show the new one.
You can show whatever you want, but
Thanks so much. David Gluckman, everyone.
thank you.